I'm Dr. Neil Payne.
And I'm Kirk Lyons, and this is All Things Confederate.
Well, this afternoon we bring to our program Thomas Lee Willis, Executive Director of the Southern Legal Resource Center. I want to welcome you to the program, Tom.
Glad to be here.
And the past week has been very interesting at the Southern Legal Resource Center. We've been in the news.
Oh, yeah.
And this past March, we filed an application on behalf of the Texas Division Sons of Confederate Veterans for a historical marker in front of the Supreme Court building to basically tell the story of where those buildings came from. That the first building, the Supreme Court, was dedicated as a memorial to Confederate Texans, and that all the other buildings came from the Confederate Pension Fund. And this application was sent to the Texas Historical Commission. It got initial approval. Mm-hmm. And they required us to get a letter to all the owners of the building in the Texas Supreme Court. And it looked like this was just going to be routine. But oh no, nothing is routine when it comes to Confederate. They started doing the secret song and dance in the back room and not bother to tell us what was going on. Mm-hmm. And last week, the press started calling us regarding a letter sent to the Texas Historical Commission by 12 legislators in the Texas House and Senate who just happened to be black, and demanding that this is glorifying the Confederacy, maintaining slavery, oppression, and we oppose any further glorification of the Confederacy.
This plaque was the plaque that already was there.
Right. And this was just for a historical marker.
Yeah.
To say how those buildings came here, that they weren't just brought up out of pixie dust, right. That they actually was a legislative and constitutional process, taking money from the Confederate Pension Fund and giving it to the building fund, passed by the people of Texas. And so this was just to tell the story of how these buildings came around.
So we're just telling the actual history of this and not rewriting history according to the Black Caucus.
Right. It was as simple as Bill Daniel, who was the architect of the constitutional amendment that got all these buildings built. He always thought it important that the story be told. And the best way to do that would be a historical marker. Right. And Tom, I think you got some thoughts on this that you wanted to add. So without any further ado, I'll let you take it from here.
Okay. Well, yes, certainly. What I was found most interesting about this whole process is the letter that Senator Ellis had sent out in opposition to the plaques being replaced. And it's interesting that part of his letter that he uses, he refers to history. And I'll quote his letter, but I would recommend that you go to the SLRC website and read that letter in its entirety. In that, he says, Winston Churchill said that history is written by the victors. This is apparently true, except for the Civil War. And it's interesting that if somebody says something enough times, it becomes gospel. And the idea that the victors have the right to write history flies in the face of the reality that history should be based off of what the truth is. But he then goes on to say that the truth that is proposed by the Confederate revisionist of history is completely different than his view and really what should be. And so he goes back to quote the secession documents of 1861, and he even says, after all, who better knows why the Civil War was fought than those who actually fought it? Well, the reality is the men that drafted the secession documents that were calling the people to support the invasion of the federal government from the North certainly were interested in the issues of the day, but in reality, after all, who better knows why the Civil War was fought than those men who responded to their leadership at that time, and who took up arms to defend their country and to defend the right to be a sovereign state. And the senator would say that the only reason for the war between the states was slavery. And some would say that the Southerners, the Southern revisionists, would say that the war had nothing to do with slavery. Right. But certainly slavery was an issue within all the states of the Union at that time, and but not necessarily the main reason.
Well, that's just a red herring that this silly person dredging up to try and get his way. It's just whining. All this letter is just a bunch of whining, and it's just how can he even consider himself a senator of the state of Texas and whine so pitifully like this? The idea that he quotes Winston Churchill and says history is written by the victors, and he's using that to justify what he wants to do. Winston Churchill was talking about how history is distorted by the victors because they get to write what happened. So he's urging us to put up with a distortion of history simply because he thinks he's on the winning side. Hey, that's all in the world. He says that further in the letter that it's going to glorify the Confederacy by telling the truth of the history of the Supreme. No, he just doesn't want anything possible that's good to attach to the idea of the Confederate nation. That's all he's trying to do.
And as I told the press last week, none of these people bothered to contact us. What really happened was these 12 legislators who happen to be black decided to play the race card. Mm-hmm. They contact the Texas Historical Commission, which goes into self-defense mode. Oh, we've got something controversial. We can't have that. So they decide the easy way is to just junk our application on spurious grounds. Mm-hmm. They actually found a legal excuse that they thought will work. It really doesn't. And they throw our application in the trash can and then don't bother to tell us. Mm-hmm. I didn't get the letter from the Texas Historical Commission until Monday, this past Monday. All last week, they're putting out press releases, making these decisions regarding our application, and they don't even bother to let the applicant know that this is going on. Mm-hmm. And so this is how Texas government works.
Yeah. Texas wouldn't have the Supreme Court building or the complex of administrative buildings that are around the Capitol if it weren't for the Confederate pension funds. They didn't. Correct. They were having offices in the hallways and sitting on stacks of boxes before those buildings were built.
And historic Texas records being kept in chicken farm buildings and all scattered all the state. Yeah. And as I told these other news people, I said, how do you tell that story without using the C word? Mm-hmm. I mean, you cannot get around the fact that the Confederate Pension Fund had excess funds because the widows and veterans had reduced in number so that they had more than enough money to pay for these pensions and still have money left over. But you couldn't transfer the money without a constitutional amendment because we got our weird 1876 Constitution in Texas, and it makes it very hard to add things to it without a constitutional amendment. So we have to do it.
Basically, everything has to be done important with the constitutional amendment.
So Bill Daniel, who is our friend, good friend of the SLRC's, back when he was a legislator in the 1950s, he went 3 times to the legislature to try to get a bill passed to create a building fund. It never would happen because all of the landlords who had vested interests in downtown Austin did not want the state office buildings competing with their office rental to state agencies. Right. So he finally got Governor Alan Shivers to agree to passing a constitutional amendment, which he would have to go and stump the state for, so that the money could be transferred from the Confederate Pension Fund to the building fund. And that happened, and the state has had the benefit for all these many years.
And the only thing they asked was that it be noted in a permanent way and make a memorial building to the Confederacy, put a cornerstone or something permanent part of the building to let people know that that's what happened. That's where it came from.
They don't like to hear this, but that's the largest Confederate memorial in the world.
Yes.
Because it is still dedicated to the Texans who served the Confederacy. And
you see, this is the Negro revisionism that's going on with these legislators.
Yeah.
They want to change that fact. They want to obliterate it. That's a very important issue, not only for just this one thing, but it speaks to the issue of all of the memorials to the Confederacy, how they want to get rid of those, change those, how they want to change wills, they want to change facts, they want to change history to suit their modern tastes and their modern convenience. And I say that it cannot be allowed to happen. You cannot let one age veto the history of a former age.
Sure. And so this also comes back into the plaques, and we had heard from a SCV camp meeting last night that members of the SCV think that the case went to the Supreme Court and that we lost, and there's all kinds of rumors flying around that have come back up And it all relates back to the plaques. And of course, the SLRC is handling the plaques case for the Texas Division after a 10-year hiatus. And we're having to address this as issue. And this was kind of a sidebar issue, the application, which Governor Daniel always thought that it was important that we tell the story of how these buildings came to be.
Exactly.
And that would support why the building, the Supreme Court, is a memorial to Confederate Texans. And that's all we wanted to do. It was rather innocent. Of course, we expected that something like this could happen. You know, Confederates never get a free pass in this day and age. No free pass for us. But we'll fight on, and it's given us an enormous amount of good publicity. And it could rekindle the fire in the plaques so that people in the state of Texas, let's get behind this, get behind the Texas Division, and let's get those plaques back up. We're entitled to attorney's fees. We won that part of the case. We're entitled to tell the state of Texas to rip those replacement plaques down. Now let's get the plaques back up. And to do that, the people of Texas are going to have to get behind the Sons of Confederate Veterans and make this happen, because the Texas Historical Commission is a creature of the governor, and he's not going to support this. We know Rick Perry. He's not going to support this at all. So the people of Texas need to get behind this and get behind the SLRC and become SLRC members so we can fight with the Texas Division and get those plaques back up. If it takes 50 years, it's taken 12 so far.
Well, I would say anybody that believes in the truth, this is an important issue for you. It doesn't matter what race, color, creed you are, you should be interested that the truth be told, warts and all. And we don't get the luxury of picking and choosing the parts of history we like. But it's important to know what history is, to know what is good that happened in the past and the bad that happened in the past in order to try and avoid the mistakes of the past. But when you start changing the past, like in 1984, that's when you get into real trouble.
That's absolutely true. Well, Tom, why don't you give us a pitch for the SLRC and we'll end this thing.
I'd just like to close this episode of All Things Confederate by just giving a word of encouragement to all of our loyal supporters and members, and just to let you all know how much we do appreciate what you give for the cause of for Dixie, for liberty, for our nation, and for our world. And I just ask that you would continue to work for the cause of truth.
And all the Confederate Voice is out, so you should be getting your copy of the Confederate Voice. And if you are not getting your copy of the Confederate Voice, contact Tom so that we can make you a member and get you a newsletter. And check us out on Facebook, Southern Legal Resource Center, and check our blog site on our website.
And please go like our page on Facebook.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.